this talk is going to be about self-care, and what it is and the importance of it and all that good stuff. So, first things first, I'm going to do some definitions. If I can get the thing to work, there we go. Right, can I move that the way? So, yes, first things first, some definitions. I want to talk about mental health and mental illness and mental ill health, and I'm going to use them in specific ways, so I'm going to define them first. So when I talk about mental health, I talk about the brain equivalent of physical health, essentially. We all have mental health regardless of how we interact with it, just like we all have physical health regardless of how we interact with our physical health. Mental illness is a diagnosable chronic condition. So when I talk about mental illness, I talk about things like long-term generalized anxiety, long-term depression, and then things like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, the longer-term kind of chronic diagnosable conditions. When I talk about mental ill health, I talk about more temporary periods of not feeling great, and you can have depression, anxiety, and those kind of things that are periods of mental ill health if you're going through a stressful time, like we all are right now probably, but it's not necessarily chronic enough or rises to the level of being diagnosable, and therefore that's the difference. I say this because I think a lot of people think that I find a lot of people don't think about their mental health until they really have to, and a lot of people don't think, like, I think the phrase mental illness is still quite a heavy thing, and a lot of people don't think about their mental health in terms of temporary issues that you could have. And so I'm kind of getting all these definitions out of the way so people know what I talk about. But we all have mental health is the thing that I want you to take away from this. We all need to keep an eye on our mental health. We all need to look after it, just like we all keep an eye and look after our physical health. I'm going to talk about stress as well. I want to talk about stress. I don't necessarily mean bad things happening, because stress can come from good things as well. You can be doing something amazing, but it still be really stressful on your mind and body, right? Getting a new job, that's a period of time that can be quite stressful. Having a new addition to the family, whatever that may be, can be stressful, but can be really good and really enjoyable. And the thing is that I want to make sure that, I said, a lot of people tend not to think about their mental health until they're going through mental ill health and they're suffering, and then they kind of engage their mental health. And it's important to engage with your mental health regardless of whether you're feeling good or feeling bad. Just like it's important to look after your physical health, whether you've got a cold or the flu or an illness that means you need to look after it a bit more, or you're feeling fine, but you still need to like exercise and eat whatever's right for you and all that kind of stuff. So it's exactly the same thing across the board. So, final definition, self-care. What is self-care? So, self-care as a concept can be attributed to Audre Lorde, who said that caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And that's kind of the thing. Self-care has fairly radical roots. It is about looking after yourself in the face of oppression or in the face of a world that makes you very anxious or very depressed and that kind of thing. It is about looking after yourself fundamentally so you can live well and thrive rather than survive. So for me, it's quite important to make sure I kind of keep coming back to self-care as this kind of act of self-preservation, especially now as it's been co-opted a little bit by people who want to sell us things, which is fine. I'm not going to crap on that too much. It was just more of this is its roots, right? Self-care is a fundamental act of looking after yourself in a world that maybe doesn't want you to look after yourself. So I'm going to talk about what self-care is for me, and how I engage with self-care. And then hopefully you can take something useful or helpful from that. And I would also love to hear what self-care means to you, because I find that people engage with it very differently, depending on their needs and what helps them. And so I always really enjoy hearing what other people think and what other people find useful. But for me, self-care fundamentally is about listening and boundaries. Listening to myself, listening to my body, listening to my feelings, understanding how they affect me and what they might mean, and then acting on them if I need to. So a lot of self-care is kind of around things like meditation and yoga and mindfulness and things that get you out of your brain into your body, as Geeta said, opening the day. And that is great. Like, I love getting out of my brain. I do a lot, or I did. I've got out of practice, but that's a whole different thing. I used to do a lot of yoga because it's really hard for me to overthink things when I'm trying not to fall on the floor doing a yoga pose, like my brain can't handle all those things at once. So yeah, that's kind of what I do. That it kind of gets me into my body. It stops me from just constantly overthinking things. It's all very good. But for me, self-care goes a step beyond that as well. It's about using that quiet to listen and hear what my body is trying to tell me and what my brain is trying to tell me as well, and how the two interact. So it's about making sure that I'm listening to my anxieties or my mood swings or whatever it is that's happening at the time, and just acknowledging that those things are happening. I am experiencing these things. They may be incongruous to the situation that I'm in. They may not be. I may not be able to control what's causing them, but I am experiencing them. This is what is happening. This is how it's making me feel physically. This is where I'm at. And it's about accepting that as the situation that you're in, not necessarily fighting against it, not trying to change it, but just sitting there and going, okay, this is where I am. And the reason I find this useful or important to me is because of this. So, broadly speaking, empathy is the ability to understand what others are feeling. And self-compassion is about extending compassion to yourself in instances of perceived inadequacy or failure and being kind to yourself. To me, there is a connection between those two things. There is broadly an undercurrent of accepting feelings, accepting how you or someone else is feeling, regardless of the situation, how congruent it is to how they're doing, how much sense it makes. We are not rational beings. And to me, doing both of those things flex the same mental muscles. It is about acceptance of feelings, and that is really hard because as humans, we want to solve problems. And the minute feelings come across, we want to help people, we want to help ourselves, or we want to berate ourselves for feeling weird and we shouldn't feel this way and all that kind of stuff. But we're not very good at sitting and listening and accepting without judgment and without wanting to fix. And for me, this is really important. This is such an important part of figuring out my mental health and figuring out how to look after my mental health. So for me, when you bring the two parts of what I class as self-care together, listening to yourself and being compassionate for yourself, first of all, it gets this really nice cycle. I find the more compassion I have for myself, the easier it is to be empathetic for other people. The more empathetic I am to other people, the easier it is to be compassionate to myself, because that's the habit I get into. I start reacting to feelings with kindness and with acceptance and with, okay, this is happening, this is how we feel. That's okay. You can feel this way if you need to feel this way. We can deal with it if we want to deal with it. But if at some point we just need to sit and be because everything is too much, then we can do that as well. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is absolutely fine. We don't have to be doing stuff all the time. We don't have to be getting rid of all the feelings all the time. It's all about acknowledging that and acknowledging the good times as well, making sure that we make sure we really feel that joy and gratitude that comes from having good things in our lives as well, and making sure that we feel those things. I feel when we're moving quickly, or when, especially I think when when I'm in a good period of life and I'm feeling great and things are going well, I find that sometimes I'm not quite keeping it, like feeling it as deeply as I could, because I'm enjoying it, but I'm not enjoying it on a deeper level, because I think I'm deep down, I'm scared that if I enjoy it too much, it'll get taken away. There's some irrational fear about being like fully feeling happiness, and And I think this helps with that as well. I often find that if I'm having an empathy fail or a self-compassion fail, they kind of affect each other. I know most of the time if I'm finding it hard to be empathetic to someone at work and they're just really irritating me, sometimes it's because we just don't get on and we just rub each other the wrong way. And sometimes it's because they're reflecting something in myself that I'm not happy with and that I'm not being compassionate about. And I need to bring that up and I need to deal with that inside myself so I can then help and approach them with the empathy that we need to deal with the situation. Because most of the time, the other people don't realise that they're irritated, they're just getting on with their lives. They're not doing things to you or at you. It's your reaction. And listening to that reaction can illuminate what has caused that reaction. And then once you know what you're doing, once you know the shape of something, you're more likely to be able to deal with it, or at least respond to it in a more productive way than just reacting instantly to it. And so, yeah, for me, self-care is about knowing the shape of my feelings, knowing what things are happening, and once I know what that is, I can kind of react to it. How I started doing this, and something that I still do, is tracking my mood. I do it once a day. I have an app on my phone that reminds me 8 o'clock every night. I need to track my mood and some other things. Because I find that having something in black and white, having something in front of me that I can see and having a trend means that I'm more likely to pay attention to it and more likely to take it in. So I sit there at 8 o'clock every night and I think about how I feel on a scale of 1 to, I think it's 1 to 10, my app does. 1 being awful, 10 being amazing, and there's other things in between. So I start off kind of high level. How smiley am I today? And then from there, I dive in a little bit more. Am I anxious? Am I just whatever? Am I feeling great? Am I feeling optimistic? What am I feeling? And then it's like, what does that actually physically feel like? I know what that emotionally feels like now, but what's that physically feel like? Have I been jiggling my leg all day because I'm anxious? Am I doom scrolling because I don't want to engage with my feelings? So I'm just going through social media, going from Twitter to Instagram, and not engaging with anything in any meaningful way. How is this affecting my life physically? And then, first of all, you have a history. You can see what things affect other things, how you react to certain feelings, even if these things aren't connected in your brain. When you write them down, looking back on them, you can see, oh, if I'm feeling anxious, chances are I'm going to spend the evening just being on Twitter, making myself more anxious. When I know what would actually help me is watching a good film or a TV show, or doing some crafting, or going for a walk, or literally anything else other than spending time on Twitter, for example. And that's super important, that's the kind of stuff that actually matters and helps. And this is kind of where self-care comes from. It is about doing stuff and looking after yourself in ways like having a bath and doing yoga and wearing comfortable fluffy dressing gowns, but it's about doing that in reaction to something. It's about doing that so you can listen to your feelings and sit with those feelings, so you're not constantly distracting yourself with life and the internet and everything else, because for me, fundamentally, self-care is about sitting with my feelings, dealing with them, and then being able to go and do other things with my life, because I know I've figured out my feelings a little bit. I've not figured out my feelings entirely. I'm still paying my therapist to help me with that. But you know what I mean? I'm starting. I've got some techniques that really work for me. Another thing that I want to bring up, because this is something that has been affecting me quite recently, and I know it's affecting other people, because every time I've mentioned it, people have told me that it's resonated with them, and that is the difference between coping with something and dealing with something. So back in July, I had a call with my boss. I had a one-to-one, which we have weekly, and he asked me how working from home was going, and he said, because kind of this is it now until the end of the year. We're going to be working like this at least until the end of the year. And that kind of hit me, that I'd kind of been coping with lockdown, but not really dealing with it. So coping for me is just pushing through, just doing whatever you need to do to get through a temporary bit of time that you know is going to end, and then you can move on, get back and recover afterwards, right? We've all done it. There's nothing wrong with it very short term. Crunch time at work, a period of intense busyness or illness, that kind of thing. White knuckle your way through, and then it's fine. But long term, that leads to burnout, right? And dealing is about going, okay, this is the situation I am in. How can I make this good or better than it is? How can I engage with this? And it's kind of scary to do that because you've got to sit down and go, okay, my life as it is now is the foundation of how I'm going to be for another 3 months, say, till the end of 2020. How do I make sure that this is survivable without burning myself out, without just collapsing under the weight of existential anxiety about everything? How do you deal with maybe not an ideal working space? I live in a flat that isn't ideal to work in, to be honest with you. It's got like one room, or two if you count the bedroom, kitchen, living room, it's all one space, one table, and there's two of us in here working. But we can deal with it. We've got the furniture and the tools and things to deal with it, and making sure that we're actually moving through. And it's little things like that. It's reevaluating what you need now that maybe lockdown, working from home has gone from a short-term thing to a long-term thing. How do you make this work? And part of that is, again, sitting and listening and figuring out what is working and what isn't working, and tracking that and tracking those niggly things and seeing if there's a pattern to the things that are bothering you, both, again, physically and mentally, practically and emotionally. These things are all linked. One feeds into the other. And without listening to one, you're not going to be able to hear the other one fully. So you've got to take it as a whole and sit and listen. And it's difficult, but it can be worth it. So I am someone who will quite happily let perfect get in the way of good enough. I will be like, oh, I can't start doing this week because I didn't start on Monday, so what's the point? This week is a write-off. Or, well, I missed a day, so what's the point in continuing this for the rest of the week? I'll start again on Monday. I am very good at doing things like that. But if something is worth doing, it is worth doing as good as you can, even if it's not perfect. I saw something on Reddit the other day, which was, if something's worth doing, it is worth doing poorly. And it kind of resonated with me because the example they had was, if you didn't have the energy to brush your teeth and floss and use mouthwash or interdontal brushes or a water pick, if you didn't have the energy to do all of that routine, but you had the energy to just brush your teeth, you'd still just brush your teeth, right? You wouldn't be like, oh, well, if I can't do it properly, I'm not going to do it at all when it came to something like that, right? You'd do what you could, and then you'd leave the rest and you'd try again tomorrow. And it's exactly the same thing with self-care. It doesn't matter if it's not perfect. What matters is the habit, because it's going to change. The more you do it, the differences in your life, in your circumstance, in your mental health, it's going to keep changing. You're going to have to keep making changes. So just do it. Do it. If you fail, that's great. You've learned something. Keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it, because it's worth doing, right? I use this stuff as a barometer as well for my overall mental health. If I'm having issues sitting, because I talk again, folks, but I'm not perfect. If I'm having real troubles engaging with my feelings, chances are that means my feelings are a bit too big and a bit too scary, and I might need to do a bit of work on that. Or I've tried sitting with my feelings and they're still not great, so I'm going to go get some distraction for my feelings, because you know what, I've tried and it's not working for me today, and that's fine. Being able to figure out where your mood is, where your energy is, means that you can then figure out what you need and what's good for you today, which is sometimes giving in to doom scrolling on Twitter because you know what, you haven't got the energy to engage, and that's fine. That's fine, as long as you know what you're doing. I make a thing where it's like, at this point in time, I basically know my own bullcrap, and as long as I know my own bullcrap, I'm okay giving into it now and then. So know your own bullcrap, and then you can deal with it. I'm coming to the end of my talk because I undershot this a little bit, but I do want to do a little bit of self-promotion. But there were plenty of time for questions, and you can ask me anything and we can chat. I could probably find some more stuff to chat about at some point. I'm going to do a bit of self-promotion. I have a company that does work around self-care. It has resources for building self-care routines, and I do talks like this and workshops. If you want to check out, there's free stuff as well. You don't have to pay me. You can Google self-care backpack, and you can find a whole bunch of resources around building these routines up. It's very pretty. If you know Bruce the legend, she made my logo for it, so you know it's gonna be pretty because it's got Bruce's art on it. So I hope that was helpful or useful, or both. Hopefully, I am. If there's any questions, if there's anything you'd like me to go into more depth on, if I missed explaining something, if I spoke too quickly, please ask and I'll go over it again. I'm aware I talk very, very quickly. But thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Jem. That was really, really cool. And I think, like Elena, I want those cards as well. I definitely want those cards. That was really interesting. I saw the part where you talked about coping and dealing, and honestly, yes, I'm more of a coping person. And trying to make that distinction between coping and dealing sometimes can be very, very hard. So I'm definitely happy to see this. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was one of those things that, and it wasn't until my boss sat down and went, so, okay, this is it now. This working situation is it, that I went, oh God, okay.
Yes,
I have
exactly.
to make some changes. It was that external thing of like, oof, okay, right.
And I love what you said in the beginning when you talked about self-care being about listening to your body and your mind as well. Because when I was younger, I just thought self-care was only about meditation and yoga, and those were the only two ways I could take care of myself. But actually, I found out that no, it's actually just you listening to your body and to your mind and trying to find out what is necessary for you in this moment.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, yoga meditation is an absolutely wonderful way to do it. Like I said, I love doing yoga, but it feels like when I first started doing self-care, I did exactly the same. And I got to the first thing and I was like, well, I've done yoga, so I've looked after myself. I'm done. And it's like, no, it's not that easy, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah, we have a lovely comment from Antonella who says, "You've changed my life. The first time I heard you, and you just have a way with words to get through me and say the things I need to hear." That was just amazing.
Thank you, Antonella. I love you. And everything I've said are the things that I've needed to hear, so I'm glad other people also need to hear them.
Okay, so if you have any questions for Jem, please feel free to pop them in the chat. We still have a few minutes.
I'll also be around afterwards as well if you want to talk to me in private, because obviously talking about mental health in public can be quite difficult. So I'm
Yes,
around.
that is definitely true. Yes. Okay. Okay, so we'll just wait a few minutes to see if there are any questions that pop up. And if not, it's going to be time for our break. So we can head off to Gathertown, and there you can also ask your questions privately if you prefer. Or if not, you can go and grab a cup of coffee or a tea. That would be perfect as well. Anything for your self-care.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Okay. So it seems like we don't have any questions. All right.
So Brad's just asked me.
Yes.
Brad's just asked about the barometer.
Okay.
I have so the app that I spoke about that I track my mood on. You can make graphs. It can show you the graphs, so I can look back and be like, over the past month, I've not been doing great. I clearly need to check in with myself in a bit more of an active way rather than just poke some buttons. The app is called Bearable. I'll put it in the chat. Bearable app. It's very good. It's highly customizable, which is why I love it, because I can track like my migraines and my other pain issues, and as well as my mood, and it can track taking medication. It gives you medication reminders. It's like a one-stop shop for me. It's beautiful. So I highly recommend that. I'm not affiliated. I just love it. It's very pretty as well. So that is what I use. And then monthly you can, or however you want. I just do it monthly because that's kind of how the rhythm goes. Does a nice little chart. There's also one called Dailyo, which again, I'll put the spelling in the chat, that does exactly the same thing. It's much more simple. So a lot of the mood tracking apps will give you lovely little graphs and charts and stuff, so you can engage with it a bit more and make sure that you're doing okay. And if you need to do a bit more, you've got that lovely visible graph that tells you, okay, fine. So how do you recommend doing that? Because it's hard to ignore it once you've got a chart telling you that you need to look into your mental health a bit more.
Yes, it can be difficult when an app is telling you that, but at least it's a really good reminder to do it. Oh, thank you so much, thank you for this.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, there's another question. How did you realize you need to take care of your mental health?
So I suffer from a couple of mental illnesses. I have generalized anxiety and I have complex PTSD. So it got to a point where my anxiety was really quite bad, and I was like, I can't actually continue holding down a job and holding down a relationship. It was one of the things where I started looking around going, how is everyone else doing like a job and a relationship and tidying their house, and not, how is everyone surviving doing this? That's a lot of things. I'm not doing all those things. And it did get to the point where I was like, is this normal? And then I started kind of generally just asking friends, and they were like, have you considered, maybe you need to get some help? And I was like, yeah, okay, that seems fair. And then 2 years later, I decided to start getting some help, because it was still quite scary. I'm not going to tell you that it worked perfectly and I am this perfect person who knows what they're doing. It took a long time for me to engage with it, but you do get to a point, I think a lot of people do, where it's like, all right, I either change something or I continue on. It's the same as coping and dealing again, right? I either change something fundamental or this is my life for the rest of my life. Can I deal with this not changing? If the answer is yes, fine. If the answer is no, then you've got to engage and make some changes. It's as simple and difficult as that.
As simple and difficult as that. I love that. And also, culture comes into play as well. So when I was younger, I grew up in a culture where going to see a therapist or asking for help was meant you were weak. So any sign of weakness was not really appreciated. So you had to just power through and not have any self-care and just show that everything is always fine all the time.
Yeah.
So now, hopefully, cultures are changing, things are changing. People are talking more openly about mental health and about self-care. So I'm really, really happy that we can be part of this as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So thank you, everyone, for your questions. Thank you so much, Jen, for this presentation as well.